Before we check with social media, I'm going to ask all of our audience here and our panelists just to tighten up their questions and their answers a little bit so we can get to as many people as possible. But we know a lot of folks have been weighing on this for the last week or two. Those at home have been sending us comments on social media, both Facebook and Twitter. So let's check in with our social media desk. Jana, what do you have for us?
Mark, a lot of what we're seeing on social media right now is about trust. Who do we believe? There are a lot of similar numbers. There are a lot of arguments that could really go either way. So I want to get to a tweet from Jacob Lehman. This is what we've been hearing from a lot of people on one side of the issue. Jacob is from Oxford. He says, no on one. Trust our biologists. That's what we're hearing from a lot of people as well. I want to get some Facebook comments. Trevor Bean, he says, hunting is a way of life in this state. Stop trying to restrict it even more than it is. But on the other side, Tony Tome says, if we can't bait, trap, or hunt with dogs for deer, then it shouldn't be allowed for bears either. Now, a question from Kelly Weeks. She asks, if trapping is considered cruel and inhumane, then why would it be okay for the biologists to continue to trap the bears for research or remove bears? I want to pose that question to the panel, Mark.
All right, it's a great question. Actually, I want to go to Judy, since you work with inland fisheries and wildlife. Do the biologists trap bears? And how is that different, and is it acceptable, or can you explain all that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to explain that. Here in Maine, we have two traps that are legal to use in the state. You can use a live culvert trap, or you could use a cable foot restraint. So those are the only two methods that are allowed. They are the same methods that our biologists use when we're in the field. They're the same methods that wildlife biologists and researchers all across North America use. These tools have been approved by animal care and use committees all across North America. They are absolutely appropriate, and if I'm telling you, if there was a safer way to do it, we would do it. It is the most efficient, effective way we have to monitor the population.
Anita, what would be the alternative? I mean, is there something, maybe another approach that might work better, that's more humane, in which they can get the animals and do all the research they need to do?
I think it's important for the audience to understand that that Maine is the only state that uses trapping, that permits the trapping of bears. So when we talk about, it's the only state that allows trapping of bears, and when we talk about whether this is essential for Maine to use this practice, relative to the number of bears taken in Maine, it's relatively a small number that is taken by traps. So one has to ask oneself, why is it that Maine still allows trapping when every other state that had used it has eliminated it as barbaric, as painful, even these leg hold snares that Judy is referring to. The Sierra Club has said that they are inhumane, that they are environmentally indiscriminate, that they catch populations of wildlife that are not intended to be caught.
That's not true.
And they're in a survey in a 2006 survey of conservation specialists, conservation experts, the majority said that these are, even the leg hold snares, are inhumane, environmentally indiscriminate, painful, and unnecessary. So in terms of replacing trapping, since no other state in the country allows bear trapping, the question is why it needs to be replaced at all.
James, what do you think?
Honestly, Mark, I think the best person to answer this question is Judy, and she knows far better than I do what other researchers across the country are doing.
Yep. The two most effective methods wildlife biologists have to capture black bears are the use of dogs and the cable foot restraint. They are used by biologists all across North America. And you know what? In my opinion, if they're safe enough for our biologists to use, they should be safe enough for the hunters and the trappers in the state of Maine to use. And I just want to clarify that there are other states and provinces that do allow trapping, and we allow these tools because we have the biggest black bear population in the east. We have the second biggest black bear population in all of North America. We have the most forested state in the country. So we use these tools because we need them.
We're back to the audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Chuck Fagoni. I'm from South Portland. My question is directed at Darrell and Anita. If this referendum passes the way it is worded, the three methods that we use today will still be allowed to be used to remove nuisance bears and protect property. That'll be done either by the biologists or maybe subcontractors. So why are you opposed to it if the methods will still be used?
Daryl?
Those methods are for public safety, and I think there should be exceptions to every rule. It's that simple. There's a difference between doing something recreationally and doing something for public safety. It really is that simple.
James?
Yeah, I think the legislation is hypocritical in nature because on one hand, the proponents of this initiative continue to tell us that these methods are cruel and inhumane, but only if a hunter uses them. On the other hand, they say that the department is able to use these three methods to control Maine's bear population. The distinction that I think the public ought to be aware of is the fact that they can only use these tools after there's been some sort of incident. It's after a bear has broken into a camp. It's after a bear has been on your back porch. So that phone call is going to happen after. Our concern is the public needs to be able to utilize these methods to control the bear population so that those complaints don't happen in the first place.
And if I could just chime in, you know, the Maine Department of Fisheries and Wildlife since 1880 has been the agency that people turn to when they need help with wildlife. We are the agency that people turn to when they have questions about wildlife, when they have an issue in their backyard. This year we handled over 600 calls about nuisance bears in the state of Maine. If this referendum passes, we will lose our ability to control the population. These three methods combined make up 93% of our annual harvest. If we lose our ability to control the population, we are going to see an increase in nuisance complaints. There's no doubt the black bears are going to move from relatively unoccupied areas by people into areas that we have a lot more people. And we will be the agency that deals with that. We will be the people you call. It's not going to be the proponents of this referendum are not going to be here to help when our nuisance complaints escalate. It's the Department of Fish and Wildlife that you're going to call. It's the Department of Fish and Wildlife you're going to rely on to come and help you. And I am telling you, as the wildlife director, without these tools, we are going to be very limited in our ability to help you.
Before I go to the next audience member question, since this topic hasn't come up yet, I would like to ask the live audience here to respond to my next snap poll to see if this has any impact on the issue. Your two choices and answers, by the sound of applause, are yes and no. Please respond to this statement. Opponents of bear baiting are overlooking the people who rely on this industry for their livelihood. Those who believe yes, please applaud. Those who believe no, please applaud. And certainly I invite, if there's anyone here on either side of that discussion who has some expertise or knowledge, we welcome their question this evening. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
I'm Betsy. I'm from York, Maine, and I love Maine. But I have a question really for Judy and James, because if this initiative does pass and the cruel practices of baiting, trapping, and hounding are gotten rid of, have you looked at the studies done at Washington State, for example, by Dr. Kolar, and what he works for the Fish and Wildlife Society out there? And what they found was by lowering the cost of the permits and increasing the number of permits that could be given, that they were able to actually stabilize their population. I think it's very important for people to know that this is not about banning hunting. Hunting, I don't hunt, but I know people that hunt, and hunting is an important tradition here in Maine. It's a way for families to get out there and enjoy the beautiful forests and woods that we live in. I have a biology degree, but you don't need a biology degree to see what's cool. So my question is, have you looked at these studies in states that have banned these and have been able to control their populations?
I'll go to Judy, and then I want to certainly bring Anita back in the conversation. And as a quick follow-up before you, do you have any data on how many bear licenses are purchased by Mainers? Yep. And how many are purchased by out-of-staters?
Yes, so to answer your question, Mark, it's about 50-50. About half of our hunters in the state, our bear hunters are residents of the state of Maine, and about half of our hunters are non-residents. And just to follow up on that quickly, we did last year survey our bear hunters, and we were a little surprised with the results, and we asked if this referendum passes, will you come back to hunt bears in Maine? And we expected the non-residents to say no, and they did. 78% of the non-residents said they would not come back to the state of Maine to hunt black bears. We expected the residents to say, yeah, most likely we'll still participate, but 61% said they would not. So we have a very limited pool of people that would be interested in hunting black bears. And you're right, some other states have done this. I've talked to all of the biologists in Washington, Colorado, and Oregon. In the state of Maine, it costs $27 to buy a bear permit, so it's not very expensive. And what's actually happened in pretty much all the other states is that they have been successful in increasing their number of hunters, but they haven't been successful in changing the hunter success rate, nor have they really been able to deal with the nuisance complaints. The state of Washington last year had over $5 million in damage to the timber industry from black bears. And I was on the phone last night with the director of wildlife from the state of Colorado. And you know, their bear population in Colorado, and it's important to note that those states are different than Maine. We are sort of comparing apples to oranges. The landscape here in Maine is very different than it is out west. Colorado, for example, is 32% forested. In Maine, we're 82% forested. So they have really long lines of sight. Their hunter success rates are actually higher than ours are. But you know, in the state of Colorado, in the past 20 years, their population estimates pre the referendum, their population estimate was 8,000 to 10,000. Their population estimate now is close to 18,000, so 18 to 20. It's almost doubled. Their nuisance complaints have skyrocketed. In the city of Aspen, Colorado, the nuisance complaints in 2012 were the #1 call for service for the local police department. The #1 call for service for the police department was dealing with black bears in Aspen. Okay, that's not how I want my police department focusing. Their game wardens or their conservation officers spend 90% of their time dealing with nuisance complaints. I want our law enforcement, you know, going after violations, not nuisance complaints. So the state of Colorado is a good example. They're on their way to being the black bear capital nuisance complaint of the world.